The show elements of the Xciter are the elements from which you build your shows. Before going into detail, let's make a brief summary of the elements. We have background scenes, sequences, playbacks, cues, and cue lists. A cue consists of 4 optional sequences and an optional background scene. The background scene is a single-step entity which in a simplified manner means that it is a static piece of information as opposed to the sequence that may hold multiple steps and thereby produce a dynamic look. Later on though, you will learn that effect generators can apply a rather dynamic look to a scene regardless of its single-step nature. The sequences being multi-step entities are simply lists of scenes with timing applied to them. 2 kinds of timings are associated with scenes in the sequence. They are wait time and fade time. Wait time describes for how long the scene will be active before switching to the next scene in the list. To crossfade sequential scenes in the sequence, you would be setting the fade time to something different from 0 seconds. This will instruct the Xciter to calculate in-between values, causing a smooth transition from one look to the other. The cue is where you organize your sequences and background scene. It may reference 1 background scene and up to 4 sequences. It is important to remember that the cue references the sequences and the background scene. It does not contain anything but references to them. As the sequences are not stored in the cue, they are stored somewhere else, namely in a sequence list. Say we program Q1 to reference a sequence called chase, and then we use the same sequence in Q2. If we edit the chase sequence, the changes will reflect in both sequences the second you store your changes to show memory. The next thing we're going to look at is the cue as it performs during the execution of your sequences and background scene. Let's have a look at a running cue. It may look like this. It references 1 background scene and 4 sequences. The red line here symbolizes the current time within the sequence, the progress of the scene time, so to speak. The background scene doesn't have any indication of running time. The scene time is irrelevant regarding the background scene, as it is a single-step entity. The background scene is active for as long as the cue is running, but when you switch to another cue, the fade time, however, influences the crossfading of background scenes from cue to cue, as shown here. You can easily imagine 2 sequences within 1 cue trying to control the same parameters of the same fixtures. What happens? The answer is priorities. This diagram depicts the ranking of various processes that run in the Xciter, the topmost having most influence, the bottommost the least. I'll not explain these processes in detail, but you can see that regarding cues, the ranking is lowest for the background scene, advancing up to sequence A through D, C, and B. This means if sequence A is programmed to close the shutter, well, the shutter stays shut, no matter what's programmed in the other sequences or the background scene, so be careful how you program. Common practice to avoid frustration is to program intensity into the highest priority sequence in the cue, that is, sequence A. Then color parameters in B, gobo as third, and pan tilt parameters in the last sequence. This is also known as ICBF, intensity, color, beam, and focus. This is merely a piece of advice. The Xciter does not restrict you to this scheme, but if you do this, you'll be less prone to confusion by strange but yet logical behavior. Switching back to the process diagram, you'll notice that playbacks rank higher than sequences. The reason for this is that playbacks are meant to overrule your running show, thereby letting you create unlimited variations on the fly. Just like a cue references up to 4 sequences, a playback references a single sequence. It can even be the same sequence as used in a cue if that's needed. To understand playbacks, take a look at this diagram. We have discussed cues as being a background scene and up to 4 sequences. Imagine a kind of super cue with 6 slots that enables you to mix in sequences on the fly. And as you see here, Xciter crossfades nicely between what's currently on the output and what you insert with your playbacks. A perfect feature for, say, real-time color mixing. As you saw previously, playbacks have a higher rank than a running cue. So no matter what is programmed in your queue, you'll always be able to overrule with a playback for instant changes, the only exception being the dimmer channel. The dimmer channel does not respect priorities and simply resolves to the highest value. This is also known as HTP, highest takes precedence. The last topic we need to cover is the queue list. The name almost explains itself. It's a list of queues, just like a sequence is a list of scenes. The only difference is that queue lists, of course, represent more complex looks and dynamics because they reference entire queues. Queue lists offer a set of commands to let you program how the queues in the list are actually executed. Queue lists are great for making shows that run with little or no attention required from the user. To sum up the important concepts that Xciter uses, we have the background scene, the sequence, which is a list of scenes and are very similar to playbacks in terms of structure, but different in the way of being played, and finally the queue list, being a list of queues. These are the structures or concepts that you'll be using over and over again during programming and playbacks of your shows.